What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the 4.09, 4.1 weapon tier list. And we're not only going to be talking about what weapons are good and bad, but telling you when and where you should buy them so that you can get the maximum effect every single round and dominate your games. But first, let me tell you about this insane tool, the Overwolf Valorant Tracker. This is an in-game Valorant tracker that is going to give you live performance updates while you're playing. You're going to be able to look at your player profile, find your best and worst maps so that you know exactly what you need to focus on, your own personal stats, your most played agent that you can use to gather important information about what you need to do and how you can improve from here. This is our most exciting sponsor yet because it goes hand in hand with our mission to help you improve, and this is perfect for those of you who want to climb. So go check it out right now in the download links below. Kicking it right off with the bottom of the barrel, and we're going to talk about the F tier. And I'm actually moving 2 weapons to the F tier, and we had a big conversation about these weapons in a previous video. It's the Stinger and the Bucky. Now, something important that you need to understand about these weapons is they have an astronomically low pick rate. They have basically fallen so hard, they almost see no ranked play and they see literally 0 pro play. Well, what actually happened to these weapons? They used to be great. How come they're F tier and basically unpickable? Well, there's 2 big problems. 1, they've been nerfed so hard that it's hard to find uses for these guns. And 2, for the price, there are much better alternatives. When you compare the Stinger directly to the Frenzy, I mean, oftentimes you're going to be able to get the same kills with the Frenzy for half the price. And the Bucky is very inefficient as far as the shotgun's concerned because of how long it takes you to fire in between shots, because of how ineffective the convergence fire is. The Bucky is just not worth the price of entry, and you have so many appealing weapons around this price or under. Just to name off a few, we have the Frenzy, we have the Shorty, we have just the classic pistol, we have the Marshall, or, you know, just spend your credits on abilities. There's a lot better weapons you can buy than these 2. Now let's move on to the C tier. These are weapons that are very, very good, but they're niche. So they have really strong situations, but those situations might not come up all the time. And there's 3 weapons in this category: the Omen, the Shorty, and the Judge. Now, let's first talk about the one at the bottom, the Odin. Now, the Odin is powerful, and there's times when it can be utilized to great effect, but you typically want to combine it with some way to see through walls, someone like Sova, and a wall that you can wall bang. Typically, people play this on Ascent, on Defense, on B site. Now, of course, you could use this as a regular weapon, but when you're comparing it directly to rifles, especially when players get to the skill level where they could just dink you if you stop moving and crouch and try to spray with the Odin's not that great. And while I think personally the weapon can be utilized on Ascent the most, on a lot of maps it's going to be really poor, and the long distance maps it's going to be basically unusable, like using the Odin on Breeze, for instance. Next up, we gotta talk about the Shorty. The Shorty's actually pretty good, and I think it actually is better the lower in rank you go because players do not properly use utility to flush out smokes or spray through or clear their corners. The list goes on, and you can get some free kills with the Shorty. And its very cheap price tag makes it appealing. The only reason that it isn't higher up is because the classic pistol is just so damn strong. In a lot of cases, buying that one ability or just saving that extra money so that you can buy your rifle, armor, and abilities in the next round is gonna be better than just buying that Shorty, only because the classic pistol might not be as strong as the Shorty from those closest ranges, but it's infinitely more flexible and you still have the ability to one-tap close range targets. Now, last up at the top of C tier, almost to the B tier, is the Judge. Now, the Judge, everyone knows how strong this weapon can be. It can be completely broken, and if you're someone like Dasnerth, you could take it to the absolute moon and just dominate people with it. But for your regular player, the Judge is a little bit niche in its application. It can be difficult to use this weapon on attack because you have to find a way to get close to enemies, and that's not always going to be feasible. But on defense, you can gamble often with a weapon like this and sometimes get a lot of kills if enemies don't properly respect you, clear you out, or play around a Judge. There are situations where the Judge is going to be able to pick up 3 kills, but there are other situations where you're going to be put on retake and you got a Judge and no way to get close and you just die. That makes the judge better depending on the map you're on, depending on if you're on defense or attack, and depending on what character you're playing, and of course your rank as well. There's a lot to factor in, but when you get that perfect scenario with the judge, it can absolutely flip around that you have no business winning, get your entire team an upgrade, and y'all just turn that momentum into a win. So for that reason, it's really strong. Now, next up, we got to talk about the B tier. These are weapons that are really strong in some situations, but they're not as good as some of the meta tier weapons, but they have their places in certain games and situations. Now, at the bottom of the B tier, we got to talk about the Bulldog and the Guardian. Now, the Bulldog, you're most likely going to buy this weapon when you win that first pistol round and you have enough money to buy full armor, your abilities, and, you know, a Bulldog instead of a Spectre. Because a Bulldog will scale better into the next round. If you full buy, which you should full buy, by the way, on that second round with armor, so that you're really unlikely to lose that second round, buying the Bulldog instead of the Spectre is going to make you much, much better at fighting against rifles when the enemy finally buy rifles on that third round, assuming they didn't force on the second. Now, the problem with the Bulldog, though, is it's not that much better than the Spectre. And I would say the Spectre is actually a little bit more consistent to win that second round than the Spectre is, because the Spectre is very, very easy to use and almost guaranteed. If you have armor plus a Spectre, you properly distance from enemies, unless you get dinked by a sheriff, you're probably gonna win that second round and get a lot of kills with the Spectre. The Bulldog's a little bit harder to use, a little bit harder to control, but it is gonna scale better into that third round, and that's the reason that you would buy this weapon. The other problem with the Bulldog is you're not always going to be able to buy it. You have to get some amount of kills in that pistol round in order to actually afford this Bulldog. And I wouldn't say it's always worth it, depending on the character you are, to buy the Bulldog with armor and no abilities versus the Spectre and armor with abilities. It's going to depend on your personal preference, how good you are with the Bulldog and your character. So that's why it's only at the bottom of B tier. Next up, of course, is the Guardian. The Guardian is a really great weapon, not just for that round, but for a lot of situations where you can actually buy that Guardian, especially on long-range maps. I think the Guardian is phenomenal on a map like Breeze, especially if you're Chamber or Jet. But you can really play the Guardian dependent on your skill level, how confident you are at hitting your shots, and it's going to be a really great weapon for taking these precision duels. And I do think that the Guardian's a really powerful gun that should be utilized more. Now, next up, we do got to talk about the Frenzy. The Frenzy is actually phenomenal, and there have even been players that are showcasing the Frenzy, just dominating it Frenzy only all the way up to Immortal, which is absolutely just ridiculous. I think Dr. Freeze did it. And really, if you don't even put that much practice into the Frenzy, you can run it down and kill a ton of people with this gun. It's really, really strong. You can just body spray and run and gun and kill some people that are not properly expecting you. It's gonna dominate precision-based weapons. Like if someone has a freaking, even a Marshal or, you know, a Sheriff or even a Guardian, and you are close range and you run and gun them, you're gonna win that duel with the Frenzy without even practicing. But you put a little bit of practice into this gun, and all of a sudden, you're doing these really sharp little 3-4 round clusters from even mid to slightly further than mid range. The Frenzy is very versatile, very strong, and I think it's a really great weapon to buy, not only for pistol round, depending on your character, but even just to buy in a save round, potentially, if you're confident with this weapon. Now, the last weapon in the B tier is actually the Ares. Now, the Ares is going to be a weapon that is really good to buy instead of the Spectre on certain characters. I think that if you have a way to both see people through walls and wall bang something, you can get a lot of value out of this Ares, and the cool thing is that value will still translate even up against rifles, right? If you see an enemy through a wall, you could spray through a wall and just burst them down. You're gonna be able to get a ton of damage on them in a way that a Spectre would never be able to. Like a Spectre cannot wall bang the same way. You're gonna have to take a straight up fight with an enemy, but the Ares can make an unfair fight with the enemy. And on top of that, it just being so cheap, I think that the Ares is actually really strong, but it is niche in its application, unlike a weapon like the Spectre that can be used by any character. Now, let's move on to the A tier. These are weapons that are top of the meta, very, very strong. They're not the absolute peak, but they are going to be used in every single game by both sides, and they're really good. You should definitely practice them. First off, we gotta talk about the Ghost pistol. Now, Ghost is interesting because I think that some people have a lot of problems with the Ghost. Like, they feel like they're whiffing all the time. I think it's important that you need to practice with this in DM or just up against training bots. The most important thing is combining fluid movement with making sure that you're not firing too fast to where you keep losing your first shot accuracy. I see this all the time when I VOD review, where players will not only run and move, but they're firing too much to where their bullets are not accurate at all, and they're aiming head level, so all their bullets are missing. You need to find a rhythm of movement and a rhythm of firing appropriately to try to get that first shot accuracy. It's gonna take a little practice, but if you do, you're gonna win a lot more rounds with this weapon, and you're gonna be able to pop off with it. But it's only at the bottom of A tier because realistically, the pistol round is the only round that you would buy this weapon. Then next up, we gotta talk about the Marshall. Now the Marshall's just insane. I mean, it's so cheap. You can body shot really easily. The fact that it's almost first shot accurate, even if you just, stand still and fire, is crazy. The weapon is phenomenal at fighting from long ranges, so that automatically makes it really, really good on a map like Icebox or a map like Breeze. But it's flexible in the fact that you could just barrel stuff people, and it's like a goddamn pseudo shotgun. Like, it's just insane. Like, this weapon is so strong, but of course, it's gonna be even better on characters that can, take a peek and get out. Someone like Yoru, someone like Chamber or Jet. But realistically, especially if you far outdistance the enemy, the Marshall's gonna give you multiple chances to hit a headshot on them. And that's really, really strong. And this gun's another gun that you gotta practice, put in the time. But if you get really good at this weapon and you can realistically get 1 or 2 guaranteed and sometimes more, you're gonna clutch up and win a lot of eco rounds, a lot of save rounds. And you can even buy this if you're like on defense on Breeze. Even if you win that first pistol round, if you're a duelist that can utilize it really well, and you could buy it, potentially sacrificing full armor for half armor in your buy round for the chance to clutch up this round. But you gotta be honest with yourself. How confident are you in this gun? How much practice have you put into it? And evaluate from there, deciding whether or not it's worthwhile. Now, the last weapon that we have to talk about in the A tier is the Spectre. Now, the Spectre is just the tried and true, right? The most consistent way to guaranteed win that second round if you win the first pistol round is to buy armor plus a Spectre. Now, a lot of people ask me, should they always buy? What should they buy? How should they buy? If you win that first pistol round, almost everyone should be buying full armor plus a Spectre. And the reason that you do this is it's very, very hard to die to abilities or just trash damage, because the armor keeps you protected. You could space yourself away from enemies. You have a huge magazine. You could spray through smokes. You could slightly run and gun. There's a lot that is going to prevent you from getting cheesed out if you have a Spectre, right? But if you buy, like, I don't even know, a rifle plus light or a rifle plus no armor, you could die to a goddamn grenade or something silly out of nowhere, a Marshall body shot, and then you just all of a sudden throw that game because they grab your rifle, they kill your team, most of your team bought, and then out of nowhere, you just lose the entire momentum of the game because the next round you can't buy, they get to stack money. It's just a freaking mess if you do something like that. The Spectre basically allows you to just be very consistent and guaranteed. Now, sometimes one person could potentially not buy a Spectre and save for, an op or something really appealing in the next round. But I would say 1 is the absolute max, and it's more reliable to buy that Spectre plus armor on that second round after a win. Now, the last tier that we gotta talk about is the S tier. You know all these weapons, but we're gonna go through them pretty quickly. The classic pistol. It's free, it's strong, it's actually strong as hell. I would say actually practice with this weapon. Specifically, practice the strafing and kind of waiting for enemies to swing out into you, and counter strafing and hitting that right click. It's actually pretty consistent to get giant chunks of damage if you practice from that, slightly further than the closest range. The classic can be pretty consistent. It can give you a giant amount of ability to clutch up just unrunnable situations. Get used to whipping this out if you run out of ammo instead of reloading. Sometimes you got to. And of course, don't forget that you have a primary fire. You can use it sometimes, especially if you're shooting at an enemy that doesn't know you're there. Just remember, the time it takes for your shot to become close to first shot accurate is pretty long between shots compared to some other weapons. So you have to have an appropriately adjusted tempo compared to some of the other weapons. If you fire it too fast, the first shot will be accurate and the second shot will go to the goddamn moon. Now, next up is the Operator. Now, the Operator fell a little bit because one of the characters that abused it, Jet, can no longer abuse it in the same way. Now, you can still use it on Jet and peek and angle, but if you commit that dash and no one's there, then it's gonna be pretty hard for you to potentially take an aggressive peek and then dash away for retake like you would be able to before. So it makes her a lot worse with it. Still, the Operator is really strong, and I think that there's an Operator litmus test specifically around the Platinum rank where players learn how to use and abuse the Operator before they learn how to properly counteract an Operator with you know, diligent crosshair placement, using abilities, jiggle peeking properly. So that rank is where people are most likely to just get a lot of kills with the operator because no one's stopping them or shutting them down. So on one end, you can abuse it there, but on the other end, you need to learn how to play around it if you want to progress. Of course, we do gotta talk about the Sheriff briefly. Sheriff is incredibly powerful, but it's gonna depend on your mechanical skill and more than anything, your crosshair placement. This is the weapon that, in my opinion, is the only reason that I'm in Immortal. It's the only reason, because I'm good with the Sheriff. Because the Sheriff can win you rounds that you shouldn't win. It can get you picks that you shouldn't get. For example, you swing a corner and someone is holding it as a Reyna with a Vandal, and because you counter strafe properly, your crosshair placement is on point and you insta-dink them. Now you're up a person, someone on your team gets an upgrade to a goddamn rifle that Reyna had, and maybe off the back of that you win a goddamn eco round because you just did one good thing with the Sheriff. And the more and more consistent you get with this weapon, the more and more these situations will happen, and they kind of compound throughout all the games you play. And the big thing that I did that made me a lot better with the Sheriff is I would run DM after DM with only the Sheriff. I would do it a lot, and it was really beneficial. For a while you get stomped, but eventually you start getting some pretty sick kills, and then, you know, you practice it, you take it into your comp game, and trust me, the Sheriff is worth all the time and effort to get good with because it will carry you throughout a ton of games. Now, of course, last up, we got to talk about the Phantom versus the Vandal. Now, especially when we talk about EU and other regions, the Vandal is winning by a landslide, and even in the regions like NA, where it's close, it's about 50-50. And that means that the Vandal is really just winning in pro play. Now, it is more likely for characters that have some sort of smoke to use a Phantom. Characters that can spray through smoke and punish smokes, characters that are controllers, or characters, for instance, like Cypher, who wants to spray through his cages, they are more likely to use a Phantom because they could directly utilize it every single game because they could play around their own smokes with the Phantom. But for a lot of other characters, having the guaranteed long-range taps, having the ability to challenge really far distances, and on top of that, there's a lot of maps like Breeze and Icebox where there's a lot of long-range engagements where you would really want to guarantee get that kill, and the Vandal is just gonna do that. But most of all, while I think that there are really important situations for the Phantom, and there's really other strong situations for the Vandal, I will say that the diligent crosshair placement you learn with the Vandal is going to make you a better player. A lot of times people get really lazy with the Phantom, that's what I see, because they can get away with it. But with the Vandal, you cannot. And eventually, you can't get away with it on both guns. But I think that a lot of people use the flexibility of the Phantom as a crutch, which is not gonna help you in the long run. But at the end of the day, of course, it's personal preference. Definitely let me know which one you use and why down below.